Venomous back with another StarCraft 2 cast. This time we have another installment of the Venomous Classic series, a series in which I take a look back at classic StarCraft 2 games, games that deserve revisiting, games that had a significant impact on the history of the scene. And what I have for you today is something that I bring to you with a heavy heart. It is a match between my favorite player ever and a recently fallen paragon of the scene. This is IdrA versus iNcontroL. This comes from a show match series called The Most Evil Genius, where the StarCraft 2 clan Evil Geniuses had their players compete against each other in these show matches, essentially just to try to figure out who was the best. And in the bottom left here of one of the most classic maps in StarCraft 2 history, we have iNcontroL, the late great player from Seattle, a guy who won WCG, a guy who means more to the scene than almost anybody else. I mean, he's right up there with IdrA, Day 9, Artosis. He's a pillar of the scene, and I don't mean that as an exaggeration or a retroactive judgment. iNcontroL really did mean a lot to the scene. Now, if you were somehow unaware, Geoff iNcontroL Robinson recently passed away due to a pulmonary embolism, which is a blood clot in the lungs. I remember back in about 2014, iNcontroL had a blood clot issue with his leg. This was back when he was married to Anna Prosser, and iNcontroL tweeted out that, you know, this is a dangerous thing, you gotta have this checked out, you have to be careful, and thank God I lived. Well, unfortunately for iNcontroL, years later he had another blood clot, and it went to one of the worst spots possible, which was his lungs, and unfortunately he passed. And I made an entire video commiserating iNcontroL and reflecting upon all of his great moments. I encourage you to check that out. It is a very raw, emotional, honest video. But for now, we're just going to focus on this game. This is iNcontroL versus IdrA. These are two of my favorite players. We saw that IdrA went for pool first and has Lings on a Shift A move command to scout out proxy pylons. This is a quintessential Zerg tactic that you want to do versus Protoss, as IdrA goes ahead and takes his early third. Now, if you're familiar with StarCraft 2, then you're aware of the fact that this is Daybreak. This is one of the classic maps, and this is a map that was played in Wings of Liberty very heavily. If you look at the most heavily played maps ever, I would say that Daybreak is #1 for Wings of Liberty, and Belshir Vestige is #1 for Heart of the Swarm. This is a map that got played over and over and over again as we see iNcontroL's second cannon finish. iNcontroL was a player known for his cannons. He wasn't afraid to cannon rush. It was one of his favorite strategies, and it was always something that iNcontroL sort of did shamelessly. It was something that he would do and say. It wasn't like, oh yeah, like a lot of people when they cheese, it's like, well, you know, I'm doing a cheese here, and it's just something I do to mix up my play, almost like apologizing for it. But with iNcontroL, it was like, no, like, Zergs are going to be greedy, and they're not going to respect this, so I'm going to break out the cannons. And as someone who has watched Galsy and Combat X over the years, this is something that I can really respect and sort of laugh at, as iNcontroL was not afraid to break out the cannons. And we can see here that this is a typical move of someone who loved cannon rushes, because despite the fact that IdrA has already taken and established his natural and his Roach Warren just finished, iNcontroL actually cannon rushed the third. And this isn't something that is normal, but it is something that you love to see from people who love to use cannons. And IdrA really wanted to go into a macro game. Greg IdrA Fields, if you don't know, the American macro Zerg, nicknamed the Macro Machine, loves to play these long games. He's a very conservative, tactical player, and he has an incredible history of a lot of different tournament wins, whether it be in MLG, in IEM, in NASL. Greg IdrA Fields is a paragon of the scene and an American hero. So to see him take on someone so popular and so funny is very interesting. And rest in peace to iNcontroL. He was such a talented and funny guy, and he's going to Stargate. And iNcontroL was never afraid to cheese. He was never afraid to be aggressive. Back in Brood War, there was pretty much one tournament for American players, WCG. And if you're not familiar with WCG, it's a very nationalistic tournament that essentially pits players from the same country against each other, and then the best players from those countries go on to compete in a final where all of the best players of their countries go on to represent said countries. And there was a famous WCG in the late 2000s, I think it might have been 2009, where Greg IdrA had been training in Korea, and he was so experienced and so talented. As we see Kale was a book character that IdrA really liked, that he named one of his pseudonyms after. Greg IdrA actually won every single game in that WCG except one. Out of all the players he had to play, the top American players, IdrA Artosis, Day9, Nyokin, all these players were consistent participants at WCG. And out of everyone that IdrA had to play, the only game he lost was iNcontroL. And iNcontroL did a 5-pool sunken rush, which was just the cheesiest thing imaginable. And not only did he beat IdrA, but IdrA actually GG'd. And if you know anything about IdrA, as we see his overlords being decimated here right as his macro hatch finishes, IdrA was pretty obviously not ready for this 2 Stargate play. But for IdrA to GG to a person who did the cheesiest opening imaginable to him, it's not only funny, but it's telling. IdrA, as well as everyone else, really had a lot of respect for iNcontroL, and with this 2 Stargate play, iNcontroL crushes forward and takes the game off of Greg IdrA. So I threw it back a little bit here to the recently fallen hero of the scene, iNcontroL, Jeffrey John Vincent Robinson. And I wanted to showcase a game versus one of his friends. And I hope you guys enjoyed that. Make sure you sub for more.